Hey everyone, and welcome to this video that I have been talking about making for a while. Had a lot of people ask me to make for a while, but just kind of haven't gotten around to yet, which is my thoughts on the current state of Standard, which if you have been a viewer of my stream or just paying attention to what I've been uploading on YouTube, you may know I don't have a terribly high opinion of it right now. I actually haven't played Standard in a week and a half, 2 weeks, just because I've just been really sick of it, and I haven't even done any kind of like review of the new mini set cards or discussion about that because I'm just so uninspired by the content of the mini set given what else is going on in the current state of Standard. It's interesting because I think Standard from like a mathematical perspective, right? If you look at like the balance of Standard, it's actually not bad, right? There's a diverse number of decks and of classes that, you know, are doing well. There's not any kind of individual deck that like really stands out as like oppressive toward the rest. Like from like a raw breakdown, if that's what you're looking at, Standard's fine, right? It's actually reasonably healthy, and yet it sucks. And I want to talk about why. I want to talk about why, despite the fact that Standard seems to be in a healthy spot, I have had about the least interest in playing it that I have in a very long time. And it really breaks down to interaction. If you look at the current Standard metagame, and not necessarily just like the top performing decks, but the popular decks and everything, one thing is very common amongst them. They are either a very aggressive strategy. You know, we have stuff like Bounce / Protoss Rogue. There's like the various Paladin decks, the various aggro Menagerie decks, you know, things like that. The aggro hand buff Hunter decks that kind of spill out a bunch of stuff on the board and try and kill you as quickly as possible. And then there's the decks that try and kill you in one turn, or effectively end the game with something that you cannot stop over the course of a turn or a couple of turns. And that latter category is much more my concern. I know that lots of people tend to get frustrated by aggressive decks being popular and powerful. I generally don't. And the reason for that is that aggressive decks are the sort of thing that it is often both much clearer what you can do to improve your own deck against them, and also something that like just allows you to play the game of Hearthstone, right? If they're like playing out minions and attacking you, you can play minions and like attack them or use removal spells and things like that. And all of that is kind of fundamental to what Hearthstone is about. You're actually playing the game and interacting with your opponent. On the other extreme, and this is something that, you know, people are like, oh, you always say this, you hate combo decks. I don't hate combo decks. I hate when there are a preponderance of decks in the metagame that make it so that once you reach a certain point in the game, nothing prior to that mattered. This isn't to say that these decks are even particularly good, that they don't even necessarily have to be like among the best decks. Like the number one example of this in Standard right now is Imbue Priest. Imbue Priest, if you just look at the numbers, is not a terribly good deck. It is, you know, a middling deck that, you know, is kind of, you know, just sort of does okay, is like really oppressed by a lot of the more aggressive decks, and, you know, is eminently beatable, right? That doesn't mean it isn't posing a problem for the experience of people playing Hearthstone Standard. If you want to play any kind of deck that's looking to play a longer game, and your opponent is playing or is able to play, right, a deck that starting on turn 7 with the coin could just kill you from full health at any time, no matter what kind of the game state is, or very nearly no matter what. Obviously, if you have a million health or if you have like a board full of gigantic taunts, it's not necessarily going to be able to just kill you, but they can often just clear that and then kill you. It really defines what you can feel like is meaningful to play. And it's not just Imbue Priest. There's Imbue Priest, there's Protoss Mage that can kill you with Colossus in one turn, or just kill you over the course of 2 turns with no meaningful ability for you to survive. There's Wheel of Death, there's Mill Warlock, there's Ursol Shaldercell, which again doesn't kill you in a single turn, but will generate enough like pressure and value from something that you have no meaningful way to interact with. They will overwhelm just about anything that you're actually doing. And, you know, kind of at the extremes, there's like King Plush, which you don't really see very often with the Imbue decks anymore, but it's still like a thing, which is meaningfully part of this category of decks that reach a point in the game and nothing prior to that happened mattered. And there are some number of ways. I say there's no meaningful way to interact. There are cards like Dirty Rat. I actually had an interesting conversation on my stream around the last time, maybe even the last time that I was playing Standard, when I was talking about how I felt like Dirty Rat was like a bad card against a lot of these combo decks. Because a lot of these combo decks, like let's take Imbue Priest, right? Imbue Priest, yes, you can play Dirty Rat against it, and yes, maybe you could hit Imbue itself or Neralex, but if you don't, then you played a Dirty Rat, your like counter card, and it did nothing, right? It did absolutely nothing meaningful. Like, it's like, yes, you can hit one of the 10 drops, but they don't need both 10 drops to kill you. Like, you literally have to hit, and again, this is in a matchup where you're playing like a slower deck where, you know, you are giving them a lot of time, you basically have to hit one of 2 cards against an extremely minion dense deck, or your card did nothing. The person who I was talking to in the chat said, well, Dirty Rat is the card that I lose to the most playing Imbue Priest, so I think you're wrong. It's important to understand sort of the rationale going on here, because obviously, as someone who is playing Imbue Priest, who played hundreds of games of Imbue Priest, the card that visibly beats you more individually than another card is probably going to be Dirty Rat, because it is a card that can hit your thing that lets you win the game in one turn, and you know that happened, right? But the real card that probably beat you more than any other card is like Harbinger of the Blighted, or like Vicious Slither Spear, right? Because those are just played and you die before you get to play your card. But the Dirty Rat, from your side, you remember the times it hit your Neralex or your Imbue. From the other side, yes, you do remember those, but you also remember the half dozen times that hit something else. You have about like a 1 in 8 chance of hitting a meaningful card if you played against someone playing Imbue Priest. Maybe 1 in 6, 1 in 7, 2 in 8, whatever. You know, it's a pretty low chance for the card that is the counter to their deck when you actually played it all. That's kind of an aside, but there isn't really meaningful interaction against a lot of these things. You can't actually stop them from doing their thing with any sort of reasonable level of surety, even if you build your deck to try and do so. At least, you know, in most cases. Like, you can try and, like, you know, like shutter block Dirty Rat out of like a slow controlling Shaman deck, and then you probably just can't like beat the board that puts down and you die anyway. But all of that is to say that I feel like there's just a lot of elements in Standard right now that feel extremely non-interactive and suppress a lot of otherwise compelling styles of decks and gameplay choices. And one of the most frustrating things is that a lot of these decks that they are suppressing are some of the like highlights of the new expansion. Like Imbue Priest, right? I am a sucker for something like Imbue Priest. When I play Hearthstone, I want to play a style of deck that gets to play a bit of a longer game that has a variety of different things happening, because that differentiation and experience is what is fun to me. And figuring out the plan that goes along over the course of the game with stuff like Discover, with stuff like Random Generation, that creates enough variety in the game that like is compelling to me and is part of the reason that I really have enjoyed this game for so long. That deck is unplayable. It's not because like, oh, these other decks are really powerful, but because you will just never win against these OTK style decks. You simply cannot. The HS replay stats of Imbue Priest versus Protoss Mage is like 18%. Imbue Priest is like 20%, which, by the way, is about the math of your Dirty Rat hitting. This is one of the decks and one of the strategies and mechanics that is introduced with the new expansion, which is something that, again, is really compelling to someone like me, and it's just embarrassing to play. It's like miserable to play. Like, it is the reason that I stopped playing Standard is because I kept trying to play this, and it was always just miserable. There wasn't anything I could try and change about my deck. It's just structural. And that entire type of strategy is unplayable. And it's a major mechanic in the new expansion. It's not like this is like I'm trying to force Control Priest into an environment. It's like I'm trying to play the cards you gave me. The cards, by the way, that were the reward for the recent quest line. Interestingly enough, that the quest line required you to play Battlegrounds, which is what I have been doing instead of playing Standard, because Imbue Priest is unplayable. So maybe they know. Maybe they're on to me. All of that is extremely frustrating. And even in some of the like non-OTK styles of decks, right? Like things like Starship Warlock. You know, obviously there's Wheel of Death Warlock, which has a lot of the same structure, but like Starship Warlock that leads up to kill Jaden, and it has a major component of it, which is like Ancient of Yore, plus Curse Campaign, plus Eternal Layover, which allows you to generate like tons of extra cards, and you know, you use Ultralisk Cavern to kill everything with the Eternal Layover. A lot of the elements of that are also non-interactive. Ancient of Yore, I think, is a cool card by itself. Curse Campaign is a cool card by itself. Eternal Layover is a cool card by itself. All these together give you this like card advantage survivability engine that your opponent can never possibly interact with, because there's no meaningful way to interact with your spells, and like there's no meaningful way to interact with your dormant minions unless you just get killed, right? And again, my argument is not that like these things are like objectively like too powerful. I started off by saying that I think that like, you know, a lot of what's going on in Standard is that the balance, you know, in a like objective sense is okay, but the actual gameplay experience in my mind is what sucks. And I'm not alone. I know that there are a lot of other people. I see thread upon thread on Reddit about Imbue Priest and how miserable it is. And obviously there's people who like playing those things. And I don't think that those things shouldn't be possible to exist. I just think that they shouldn't be as powerful and popular. Obviously, popularity is a function of power, to a certain extent at least. And there shouldn't be so many of them. There's just so many ways. Even like one of the best aggressive decks in the format, the so-called Drunk Paladin, has Ursol Sheltercell, which gives you this uninteractable late game engine that will just win against almost any control deck no matter what. And there are some control decks people are still playing because they're so powerful against the very popular aggressive decks, but those decks just get absolutely obliterated still by stuff like Imbue Priest or Wheel of Death Warlock or Mill Warlock. And it's funny to me that one of the cards that I actually hear some of the most complaints about is Kill Jaden. Kill Jaden is like very often the end game state for a lot of these control decks, because it is kind of the default, like, hey, this game's gonna go forever. This gives me a way that I don't die to fatigue and can, you know, actually win the game. Often the complaints are like, oh, it makes fatigue not matter. It's like, okay, that's fine. Fatigue exists as a mechanic in Hearthstone, not because it's somehow some fundamental element that makes the game fun. It's because games gotta end. The whole reason fatigue exists is because you don't want the game to be able to get to a state where neither player can do anything and nothing happens, and the game is a draw or whatever because both players are out of stuff. The whole point of fatigue, games gotta end. Kill Jaden can end the game. Running your opponent out of stuff entirely is not a particularly interesting or satisfying, maybe it is for you, but it's generally not a very satisfying like conclusion to a game of like, oh, I just killed every single thing you ever did and now you're out of cards and, you know, blah. Kill Jaden like is a way that is like a solved problem. Now you have to deal with everything. You can't just be planning to kill all my stuff because Kill Jaden exists. And Kill Jaden fundamentally is a thing that will end the game. Like you just get demons that are bigger and bigger and bigger. And unlike the cards that I was talking about previously, the Zerimis and Colossus and Wheel of Death and everything, the stuff that happened before very much still matters. That's the biggest difference between something like Kill Jaden and something like Colossus or Zerimi, right? When you get to the Kill Jaden part of the game, like, did you use your Ceaseless Expanse? How much of your removal is still left? You know, how much of like the various important elements have you been able to save for like this new stage of the game? It's because it's still a game back and forth, not just, hey, you're dead, I comboed off. I think Kill Jaden is a fantastic card and I'm glad it exists. And I think that it creates a dynamic that is so different than all the other ones that I mentioned before. Again, because everything that led up to Kill Jaden still matters once you play Kill Jaden. The game is not just simply over. You're not just overwhelmed by, you know, damage or, you know, like just a bunch of bounce and buff and AoE effects from like a Shaldrasil or whatever, or the game just flat out ending from Wheel of Death. That, I think, is a totally fine card in a world of otherwise, in my opinion, pretty miserable win conditions. And again, this isn't about like just the game balance of it. You know, the most powerful decks are mostly like Protoss Rogue, the Drunk Paladin, like menagerie aggro decks of various stripes. And those decks are fine. And like, I see people, anytime someone complains about like Imbue Priest, or I've seen people say like, you know, like that my comments on Protoss Mage must mean I'm a bad player. It's like, dude, I have forgotten more about more card games than you will ever know, right? I don't have the trophies up here right now, but scoreboard, okay? Just because I don't want to just sit there and spam aggressive decks because that's the only viable thing in a world with a bunch of combo decks, that doesn't mean that someone's bad at the game. It means they enjoy a different kind of thing. And if what the game is going to be about is having to spam aggro decks because there's just a million Imbue Priests and Ursol Paladins and Colossus Mages or whatever out there, I'll just play a different game. And that's what I've been doing. That's really kind of where I'm at with Standard. It sucks. The reason it sucks is because there are too many different decks and too many powerful decks that reach a point in the game at which nothing else before that mattered. And there's too few ways to interact with them. I'd love to see the power level of a lot of these things get pulled back. I'd love to see Zarimi powered down. I'd love to see Colossus powered down. I'd love to see Ursula Shaldersill powered down. I'd love to see specifically the Ancient of Yore Curse Campaign layover nonsense that enables like basically the shell of every Warlock deck powered down. I think that once you reach a certain point, you're okay with there being a King Plush Imbue Hunter, if that's like kind of a narrow thing that some people are playing, but it isn't like 40% of the metagame is something like this that it is right now. Because as it stands, I'm not playing Standard. As it stands, once the mini set comes out, I probably won't be playing Standard because I don't see it changing any of this fundamentally. This isn't about balance. This is about fun. I'm not having fun, so I'm not playing. And that's where it's at. So I really hope that we see some pretty significant changes. I don't think like one or two things is going to move the needle enough because there's so many different decks that have this fundamental gameplay experience of just kind of blah, 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 game over. And that's not fun. So yeah, anyway, that's where I'm at. I don't know if there will be balance changes coming with the mini set. Typically we don't see that, right? We typically see mini sets come out and kind of like have their chance to have their impact before things are shifted. But I really hope we see stuff in the wake of the mini set and get changed in a meaningful way because it's not fun for me right now. And I know that I'm not alone. Again, like, yes, you can just play a bunch of aggressive decks and beat these things. But like, I think that there's a lot of people who want to play Hearthstone for fun and want to play the style of deck that they enjoy and have it not feel hopeless and embarrassing. If this were Magic, I would probably, be happy playing in a world of a bunch of combo decks because I would just play an aggressive deck with some form of disruption and do my best to beat them because that's just the way my brain interacts with each of these games. But if I want to play like casually and for fun, I don't want to have to just be spamming, my aggro decks every single game because it really gets repetitive. And I'm over it. So thanks for watching. Those are my thoughts. I really do hope we see some changes coming up. If not with the mini set, then soon thereafter. Otherwise, yeah, I'll be playing something else. So whatever it is, hope to see you there.